The day I found out I was just a pawn in Elvis Presley's game was one of the most shocking moments of my life. It was after his death that I learned the real reason I had been left alone in my hotel room for an entire day. Linda Thompson, his ex-girlfriend, had been in the same building, and Elvis was busy ushering her out with one hand and me in with the other. For many around him, this was just taking care of business. But for me, it was a cruel lesson in the power and manipulation of the king of rock and roll. After the guys left, Elvis and I were alone. He told me his tour would end the next night in Anaheim, California. "You'll stay, won't you?" he asked, his eyes locking onto mine. I was thrilled and a bit intimidated by the invitation to see another of his performances. "Of course," I said, trying to sound as excited as I felt. Once we settled that, Elvis picked out a book to read. After entertaining thousands of fans, he seemed to need a way to focus his thoughts and turn everything off. I watched as he flipped through the pages, his intensity and philosophical interpretation of the text drawing me in. I felt like I was in the presence of a fascinating teacher, and I did my best to stay focused even as sleep began to tug at me. Around dawn, an aide brought in a small yellow packet and placed it on the night table. Elvis swallowed its contents with water from a nearby jug. I was instantly alert and curious. "What's that for?" I asked. "Something to help me sleep," he said, his voice calm. He had been deeply absorbed in the books, so I didn't think twice about him needing a pill to sleep. I said good night, and once again he walked me to my room like a gentleman, but I didn't sleep for long. The combination of jet lag and Elvis's strange schedule kept me awake. When I got up around 1 p.m., the suite was quiet. I figured Elvis was still sleeping, so I ordered room service and ate alone, pondering the intense and exhilarating world I was now a part of. Later, around 4 p.m., Elvis knocked on my door, wearing his pajamas and robe. "I'm going to order us food," he said. When I told him I'd already eaten, it seemed to bother him. "From now on, I'd like us to eat together," he said, his tone serious. I apologized, feeling a mix of embarrassment and pleasure at his words. It felt like he was seeing a future for us. We sat together in the living room as he ate, and he told me he was going to perform in Las Vegas after the tour. "I'll be there for 10 days, he said, his eyes hopeful. I was excited, but also worried about the logistics. I'd only brought enough clothes for a short visit and had no idea how to explain my absence to my job. But my focus was on being with Elvis. I wanted to do that more than anything. As I packed, I realized I was totally unprepared for Las Vegas. But what could I do? I closed my suitcase and walked into the living room, where Elvis was already dressed in his casual navy blue jumpsuit. During the ride to the airport, he propped his right foot on his left knee and began to nervously shake it. I noticed the edge of his pajama bottom sticking out from beneath his jumpsuit, and it made me smile. At the airport, a huge passenger jet awaited us. It was the Lisa Marie, his plane named after his daughter. The color scheme was his own creation, and he proudly showed me around the magnificent interior. The main compartment was like a living room, with suede couches, leather chairs, and even television sets. We passed a large conference table and entered a bedroom decorated in blue, complete with a queen-size bed and a reading chair. As we prepared for the short flight to Anaheim, I stayed in the bedroom with Elvis. He continued to tell me about the plane's special features, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. When we landed, employees began helping Elvis prepare for his show. I moved up front, and soon we were off to the Anaheim Convention Center. Sitting on stage behind the soundman, I watched Elvis perform. This time I stayed in my chair a bit longer, fully immersed in his show. When he performed Can't Help Falling in Love, he ended with impressive karate moves, crouching in a low stance and glancing over at me. I smiled back, realizing he had done it for me. After the show, we rushed to the limousine. Back on the Lisa Marie, Dr. Nishapoulos and some aides joined Elvis in the bedroom. I followed behind them and noticed Elvis, half-dressed, standing with his arms outstretched. Dean was zipping up his suit and putting socks on his feet. Elvis saw me and motioned for me to enter. I flicked the zipper down on his suit, and he grabbed my wrist. "Don't do that again," he said jokingly. I laughed, but I could tell he was serious about his training. Elvis sat on the edge of his bed, and I took the chair beside him. As the plane took off, he opened a suitcase and pulled out Charo's book of numbers. We talked about numerology, and the colors people should wear. He shared a story about the day he and his twin brother were born, describing a blue light his father saw above their house. It gave me chills, and I realized how deeply Elvis believed in these things. He showed me his twin toes, and then said, "You know, Ginger, I feel like I've known you for a long time. When I first saw you, it was like a siren went off inside me. I see my mother when I look at you." I was speechless, deeply touched by his words. I felt a connection I couldn't explain, as if I had known him much longer than just a few days. Elvis needed to talk business, so I left the room to give them privacy. I walked up front, trying to join the conversations. The other passengers were playing cards and games, and I felt like the new girl in town. Charlie Hodge weaved in and out with a cocktail, telling jokes, and Dean shouted, "I'm the king," after winning a game of backgammon. There were a few other women on the plane, wearing gold necklaces with the letters TLC. I would soon learn that TLC stood for Tender Loving Care, a gift from Elvis to his family, friends, and a few select others. I squared my shoulders and joined in, determined to be a part of this world, no matter what it took. After landing in Las Vegas, we climbed into a waiting limousine and were escorted by police to the Hilton International Hotel. The police escort made me feel like a VIP, and as we passed a huge, glittering marquee with Elvis's name, I couldn't believe I was really there. We entered the hotel through the back door and rode the elevator to the 30th floor. I followed Elvis down a hallway to a set of double doors guarded by a security guard. One door opened and we stepped into a luxurious penthouse. The suite was breathtaking. Gold carpeting and drapes, black pillows on the gold sofa and chairs, and a dining room and kitchen. It was all so opulent. I stood there, wide-eyed, and Elvis smiled at my reaction. He led me down a short hallway to the master bedroom, which had his and her bathrooms, a sitting area, and a king-size bed on a raised platform. The mirrored ceiling above the bed was a bit overwhelming. An aide came in, opened a suitcase, and laid out a few books beside the bed. Another aide brought in a water container, a box of Roy Tan cigars, and a schedule listing the staff's room numbers and duty time. I noticed that the aides had different jobs, like helping with Elvis's wardrobe and bringing him food and medication. Once they were done, Elvis pressed a button by the bed, and the drapes slowly opened, revealing a stunning view of Las Vegas. He gave me a tour of the other rooms, mentioning that his dad, Vernon, was coming to stay in one. I wondered which room would be mine, especially after seeing Joe Esposito in one of them. Elvis told me that his dad had a heart attack the year before, and he was glad Vernon could come to his shows again. We went back to the living room, and Elvis walked over to a record player. He put on Charles Boyer singing "Once Upon a Time." As the song played, Elvis closed his eyes and recited the lyrics with such passion. He then played "Softly I Must Leave You," a song about a man in a hospital who felt he was dying. The story behind the song touched me, and I realized how much it meant to Elvis. With no show until the next evening, Elvis relaxed. I followed him into the bedroom, thinking we might rest, but he stayed up as his staff came and went, discussing business and checking on his needs. Dr. Gainham stopped by, and I wondered about Dr. Nishapoulos. Elvis sometimes joked about using the bathroom as his office for private talks. When things quieted down, Elvis picked up a book called The Prophet by Khalil Gibran. He showed me the author's photo and said, "Doesn't he have a knowing look?" I thought the man in the photo looked deep and thoughtful. Elvis read a section where a person named Al-Mustafa talks about love and marriage. He read with such intensity that I felt the words deeply. When Al-Mustafa was asked about love, he said, "When love beckons to you, follow him, though his ways are hard and steep." Elvis explained that love can't be controlled, and that you just have to go with it. When Al-Mustafa was asked about marriage, he said, "You were born together, and together you shall be forevermore. But let there be spaces in your togetherness, and let the winds of the heavens dance between you." Elvis paused and said, "I think I could be engaged to you." I was shocked. Engaged? We'd only known each other for a week. I thought he was joking, but his words lingered in my mind. Elvis continued reading, and I tried to focus, but my mind was spinning. He then said, "You know, when I close my eyes, I can see you in a long white gown." I was speechless. A long white gown? Was he really talking about marriage? Elvis suggested we meditate. He showed me how to form a pyramid with my fingers and thumbs and told me to pray to the third eye, saying, "Christ light, Christ love, Christ peace." I tried to focus and felt a sense of peace. Elvis explained that the third eye helped us evaluate our past and understand our life patterns. It was a way to clear our minds and find inner calm. We finished meditating, and Elvis prepared for bed by putting cotton balls in his ears to block out noise. He respected my space and didn't make any physical advances. We watched TV and eventually fell asleep. The next morning, an aide brought in a packet of vitamins and medication for Elvis. We ate breakfast with some of his staff, and Ed Parker, his karate instructor, stopped by. Elvis called Ed his high priest, and explained that he had trained many celebrities and stuntmen. Ed had even promoted Elvis to a 9th degree black belt. Elvis didn't want the 10th degree because he always wanted something to aspire to in karate. Later, Elvis asked me to go shopping. He wanted me to look special for his shows. A bodyguard went with me to the Hilton shops. I felt a bit uncomfortable, but I wanted to please Elvis. I bought a pair of silver and rhinestone evening shoes, a smoky gray cocktail dress, a peach gown, and a white evening dress with long sashes. The bodyguard paid, and we returned to the suite. Elvis was in the master bedroom when I got back. "Let's see what you got," he said. I tried on the white dress and walked out. Elvis smiled and said, "You look like a Greek goddess." I tried on the other dresses, and he complimented them all, but I could tell he really liked the white one. I decided to wear it for his opening show. After putting the dresses away, I changed back into my pajamas. Elvis handed me one of his robes and picked up a book called Chero's Book of Numbers. He told me his number was 8 and showed me passages about lucky stones. One of these stones was a black diamond, which he had in some of his rings. He had lost one ring, and another broke during a show when he slammed his fist on the floor. As Elvis talked about lucky numbers and stones, I realized how much he wanted to feel protected, both on and off stage. Not just physically, but psychologically and spiritually as well. Elvis stood up and walked back into the bedroom. He returned with a magnificent ring he'd worn during his shows. He proudly rotated it in the light, showing off its custom gold and black onyx design. The center stone was an 11-carat diamond, and below it, the letters TCB were spelled out in diamonds, surrounded by diamond lightning bolts. "I wear band-aids on my fingers while performing to guard against cuts," he said, "and so no one can pull my rings off." Then he asked, "Did you notice how, on stage, I keep a side stance when I bend over to accept a gift or give a kiss?" "Yes," I said. "Why is that?" "So nobody in the audience can pull me off the stage." As Elvis talked about his upcoming shows, he seemed more nervous than usual. "I'm not just being judged by the audience," he pointed out, "but by my peers as well." Larry Geller walked into the suite. He hesitated, asking Elvis if he should stay or go. Larry wanted to color Elvis's hair, which surprised me. I had no idea Elvis's hair color wasn't natural. Elvis looked a bit annoyed and told Larry to come back the next day. The interruption made Elvis change the subject. He started talking about soul mates. He believed two people could be fated to meet and play important roles in each other's lives. They're meant to be part of a larger, inevitable picture, he told me. This was the first time I'd heard of this concept. I was intrigued but wondered why Elvis was mentioning it to me. I thought back to his earlier comments about being engaged, envisioning me in a white gown, and how I felt like someone he'd known but never known. Was Elvis thinking we could be soul mates? I felt conflicted, wanting to believe I was special to him, but also trying to protect myself from getting hurt. Our conversation continued, switching between numerology and soul mates. I learned that Larry had given Elvis most of the books we'd been reading. Elvis decided he wanted to learn more about soul mates, and asked an aide to contact Larry for some books. Larry reappeared almost immediately but didn't have a book with him. Elvis spoke to him briefly and Larry left. We kept talking through the night. The idea of soul mates and a possible future with Elvis swirled in my mind. Near dawn, Elvis took a packet of sleep medication from his night table. His speech began to slow down as the medicine took effect. I helped him into bed and lay beside him, reflecting on our conversation. The next afternoon, I met Elvis's father, Vernon Presley, for the first time. Vernon was 61, close to Elvis's height but thin and frail. His hair and mustache were silver, but I could see the strong resemblance to Elvis. Vernon entered the suite with a blonde woman in her 30s, his fiancée, Sandy Miller. Elvis and Vernon talked about how things were going, and I could tell Elvis valued his father's opinions. After Vernon and Sandy left, Elvis asked Larry to color his hair. Closer to showtime, Elvis invited Joe into the room and wanted to speak with him in private. I stepped into the living room to give them time alone. Joe came and went a few times, which confused me. When Elvis finally called for me, I sat down beside him on the bed. He got up and walked into the living room. I was mystified. Then he returned, sat across from me, and asked me to close my eyes and hold out my right hand. I did as he asked, trembling a little, and felt him slip a ring onto my finger. When I opened my eyes, I saw a beautiful gold and diamond cluster ring. He asked me to hold out my other hand and placed a ring of sapphires and diamonds on my left ring finger. Here, he said cheerfully, you have to have backups. He then gave me 2 more rings from behind his back. One was set in rubies and diamonds, and the other was a second diamond cluster ring. Man, this one reminds me of my birthday, he said, pointing to the free-form diamonds shaped like the number 8. I was overwhelmed by these generous gifts. Elvis, these rings are beautiful, but I've never really been a jewelry person, I said hesitantly. Don't worry, he said. This is only the beginning, you'll learn to like it. Okay, I agreed, I guess I will. While Elvis got ready for his show, I went to the bathroom and changed into my new white gown and rhinestone shoes. I put on the rings, still amazed that Elvis had managed to surprise me with such beautiful gifts. I walked into the living room and saw a few other women waiting there. They were dressed more casually, and I worried that I might look overdressed. I reminded myself that I was wearing what Elvis liked, and I liked it too. An aide led me downstairs to the Hilton showroom. The place was beautiful, with chandeliers, a large stage, and a stylish audience. I was escorted to a center booth and sat beside Vernon and Sandy. As the opening act ended and the lights dimmed, someone approached our booth, asking for my autograph, thinking I was Priscilla, Elvis's ex-wife. Vernon shooed the fan away. Elvis walked on stage in a King of Spades jumpsuit. The show felt more intimate, and Elvis joked with the audience, who felt comfortable enough to yell back at him. He introduced Vicky Carr, Glenn Campbell, and Vernon. When he sang, "Softly I Must Leave You," I got chills, remembering the story he'd told me about the dying man. The fans were just as exuberant as those at the Cow Palace. Women tried to climb over tables to get close to Elvis, and children were thrust onto the stage. Elvis always noticed and connected with them, especially the kids. After the show, Vernon, Sandy, and I were taken to a backstage dressing room. Elvis was changing in an adjoining room. An aide came in and told me Elvis wanted me with him. I felt a thrill at being singled out again. I followed the aide into the adjacent room and saw Elvis talking with Glenn Campbell and his wife, Sarah. I was introduced to them, and they continued their conversation about numbers and various topics. I listened carefully, reflecting on what Elvis had discussed with me. It was surprising to see how these alternative beliefs were also of interest to someone in the entertainment field. Despite my interest, my thoughts drifted to the people waiting to see Elvis. He'd been talking with Glenn for a while. When they finished, we stepped into the outer room, which was still crowded. Elvis took time to greet everyone, and then we returned to the suite. I told Elvis how much I enjoyed his show. Elvis ordered room service, while Vernon and Sandy came in to visit. Vernon gave a candid appraisal of the show, and Elvis mentioned to him, "You know, Daddy, Lisa's coming in." He added, "And Ginger, I want you to meet her." "I'd love to," I said, looking forward to it. After Vernon and Sandy left, an aide brought a tinfoil pan of lasagna for Elvis. He sprinkled it with salt several times but didn't eat much. Ed Parker and a few others came and went. As the night went on, Elvis and I read and talked. He asked if I knew what a Ferrari looked like. "No, I'm not sure," I admitted. "If you were me and you were going to buy a new car, what kind would you get?" he asked. "Well, it depends on what you want," I said. He pondered this. "I don't know. I need your help." "A Cadillac or Continental would be nice," I ventured. "What color?" he asked. "Blue or white would be pretty," I said. He smiled. Thanks, Ginger. I've been thinking about getting a new car lately. We went back to reading. Despite the long day, Elvis was still on a spiritual high. He got energized as he read and discussed his thoughts with me. Aren't you tired? I asked. He shook his head. It's much better to think at night, when the air is still and others are sleeping. Most writers and geniuses work best at night. I continued to read with him. As dawn approached, an aide brought another yellow packet of medication. Elvis placed cotton balls in his ears, took the packet, and went to sleep. I fell asleep beside him. A few hours later, Elvis woke up and asked who was on duty. He was still groggy, so I quickly looked at his contact list and called the person on duty. Elvis was like a king, and I was his queen, but it was a weird kingdom. I watched as Elvis needed help just to get to the bathroom. He seemed so off balance, and it was scary. The aide acted like it was no big deal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. After the aide left, Elvis fell back asleep almost right away, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those little yellow packets of medicine. What was in them? Why did he need them so much? I felt a pang of sadness for Elvis. He had everything, but he couldn't even close his eyes and fall asleep like a normal person. Elvis wanted me by his side all the time. It was like we were the only two people in the world. But it was also like being in a foreign country, where I didn't understand the language. Trying to figure out Elvis, his job, and all the people around him was tough. It was like Elvis was a champion athlete, and everyone was there to keep him ready for his performances. We usually woke up around 4 in the afternoon. We'd eat in the living room, and his entourage would come and go. One day, the phone rang, and I answered it. It was a woman asking for Elvis. She knew my name and said she was Linda Thompson. I was shocked. Linda Thompson. Why was she calling, and how did she know my name? I told Elvis about the call, and he looked upset. He told me that he and Linda were just friends now. He even mentioned that his bodyguard, Sam, was Linda's brother. I tried to act like it didn't bother me, but I was still on guard. Showtime was approaching, and Elvis's room was buzzing with his staff getting him ready. He used eye drops to help with the stage lights. I watched as he got dressed, and I felt a mix of emotions. The show was intense, and Elvis sweated a lot. After the first show, I helped him with a wet washcloth to soothe his eyes. It felt good to be needed, even in this small way. After the second show, Elvis surprised me. He led me out of the hotel and showed me a brand new white Lincoln Continental Mark V. "It's yours, Ginger," he said. I was speechless. I had never owned a car, let alone a luxury one like this. I hugged Elvis, feeling overwhelmed with gratitude. Back in the suite, Elvis asked if I had ever been married. I said no. Then he asked if I was seeing anyone before we met. I told him yes, and he said he wanted me to stop seeing that person. He handed me the phone to call him, but I couldn't do it over the phone. I felt like I owed it to Larry to do it in person. Elvis got angry. He stormed out of the room, and I followed him. He threw a bottle of Gatorade against the wall, and it splashed everywhere. I was shocked and embarrassed. Joe, his road manager, helped calm Elvis down. I was still reeling from the whole situation. Was I ready for this? Was I ready to be in the public eye and have people talk about me? When we got back to the bedroom, Elvis was silent. I sat beside him, wondering why he got so upset. Then, without saying a word, he kissed me. It was a deep, passionate kiss. He started to undress me, and I felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. We made love for the first time, and it was intense. I was falling in love with Elvis. The next day, Elvis and I were waiting for his daughter, Lisa. She was 8 years old and lived in Los Angeles with her mother. When she arrived, she looked just like Elvis. They hugged, and he introduced me to her. She sat between us, but her focus was on her dad. I could tell she adored him. At one point, she accidentally rested her hand on my knee and looked at me. I smiled at her, and she started trying on my shoes. I didn't mind. It was nice to see her so comfortable with me. She said, "I thought you were Linda." I gently told her, "I'm not Linda." I understood that she needed time to get used to me, and I was patient. Elvis kept surprising me with gifts. He gave me a diamond and emerald necklace, followed by another diamond necklace and a diamond watch. I told him it was too much, but he said, "People love to see beautiful things when they wake up." I couldn't help but smile, even though it was overwhelming. Being with Elvis was like living a dream. but it was also like walking on a tightrope. I was falling in love, but I knew there were challenges ahead. Elvis saw himself as someone who could make people happy by bringing beauty into their lives. He was a truly generous and kind person, always looking for ways to make life better for those around him, not just through his music, but in his everyday actions. He was a giver, never a taker, and that was one of the things I admired most about him. One night, Elvis asked me to wear all my jewelry for his show. I felt a bit overdressed, but I reminded myself that I was with Elvis, and I needed to compliment his style. In the showroom, Lisa, Vernon, Sandy, and I sat together. When Elvis came on stage in a beautiful Inca gold leaf jumpsuit, I wondered what Lisa must have been thinking, seeing her dad perform. She must have been so proud. During the show, fans shouted out requests, and Elvis tried his best to fulfill them. He was a perfectionist, and would stop and start over if anything sounded off. That night, he introduced Lisa and Vernon to the audience, and the large stage light swept across the room to highlight them. Lisa stood up, smiling, and Vernon waved. Roy Orbison and Engelbert Humperdinck were in the audience, and Elvis acknowledged them. He was in a great mood, joking with his band and trying on hats that fans handed him. I was amazed by how charismatic he was, switching from intense performances to playful moments with ease. Charlie gave Elvis lyric sheets for Bridge Over Troubled Water. Elvis only glanced at them, showing that he knew the song well but wanted to be extra careful. Back in the dressing room, I sat with Lisa, Vernon, and Sandy, watching everyone mingle. Roy Orbison and his wife, Barbara, came in, and I was thrilled to see Roy. Elvis greeted them, and they chatted. The room was noisy, so Elvis leaned forward to hear them better. I quietly sat beside him, feeling a bit shy. Elvis turned to me and asked if I could rub his back to calm him down. I hesitated, as my family didn't show much public affection, but I placed my hand on his back and gently rubbed it. He smiled, and I was glad I could help. It was a small gesture, but it made me feel closer to him. After the show, Elvis met with 3 ladies who brought him handmade figures of the 3 wise men. He spoke with them, admiring their work. These gifts would go back to Graceland. Later in the suite, Elvis ate a late meal and sprinkled a lot of salt on his food. He told me he felt bloated, and showed me his swollen fingers from fluid retention. He explained that the doctors made him take water pills before shows, which he didn't like because they made him feel weak. The next day, I woke up early and went to the rooftop terrace to enjoy the view. I felt like a tourist, amazed by everything. Suddenly, I saw Lisa climbing onto a ledge. I calmly told her it was dangerous and led her back inside. I decided not to tell Elvis, thinking it was better to keep it from him since Lisa was okay and wouldn't do it again. Later, a stout, balding man with a cigar came to the suite. Elvis introduced him as his manager, Colonel Tom Parker. Elvis and Colonel Parker needed to talk business, so I left the room. I didn't see much of Colonel Parker during the stay. He always came in and out quickly, and Elvis met with him in private. That evening, Elvis injured his ankle. He had stepped off a platform and twisted it. He had it wrapped and mentioned it during the show. He sometimes sat on a stool to ease the pain, but still gave his best performance. After the show, he had pain in his leg and thought he might have a pinched nerve. He called Dr. Gainham and Larry Geller. Larry massaged his leg, and Dr. Gainham gave him a cortisone shot. Elvis was concerned about the dry desert air and how it affected his voice. He admired the backup singers, especially Cheryl Nielsen and Kathy Westmoreland, for their consistent vocal performances. He invited Cheryl to our room, and we had a mini concert. Elvis also enjoyed talking with his bass singer, J.D. Sumner, and sometimes invited him to our room to hear his low notes. I learned that Elvis liked to be coddled. He asked me to wet cotton balls in my mouth and place them in his ears. It was a little boyish, but I didn't mind. I was happy to do these small things for him, like rubbing his back or soothing his eyes with a washcloth. Elvis had 2 sides, the entertainer and the private person. The entertainer was intense, joyful, and strained during shows. The private Elvis had his loves, passions, concerns, and pet peeves. For example, he got annoyed if someone didn't look at him while talking or yawned when he spoke. I made sure to stifle my yawns when I was with him. Elvis gave me some spending money, and I asked if I could take Lisa shopping. We went to a shoe store, and Lisa tried on shoes that were too big, saying she'd grow into them. We ran into a fan who recognized Lisa, and later we met the pilot Milo, who offered to drive us around Las Vegas in my Continental. We went to the MGM Grand, and let Lisa fill bags with candy. When we got back, Elvis was upset that we'd gone out without a bodyguard. He explained that he was worried about someone kidnapping Lisa. I promised to be more careful next time. Lisa visited the suite often, and when she left, I could see how much Elvis missed her. I hoped we would stay friends. During the next show, Elvis still had pain in his leg, and he mentioned it to the audience. He asked his backup singers to perform without him so he could rest. Despite the pain, he always gave his best. That night, back in the penthouse, Elvis called Larry and Charlie to our bedroom. He wanted Larry to perform a healing on his leg. I had no idea what this meant, but from that moment on, I was plunged into the world of psychic and self-healing. Elvis and Larry were firm believers, and they explained how it worked. If a person was in pain, they could focus on a healing color like green, and channel their thoughts to make the pain subside. Charlie closed the door, and Larry started lighting candles, turning off the lights. Elvis lay down on the bed, and Charlie and I stood by. The room was quiet. Larry asked us to imagine a golden light over Elvis's leg, and focus all our energy on it. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I was curious. As Larry massaged Elvis's leg, I saw what looked like a soft golden glow under his hand. When Larry finished, Elvis stood up and said his leg felt better. I was amazed. Could this really work? After Larry and Charlie left, Elvis told me about a breathing technique he learned from martial arts. He said it could move objects with mental energy. I asked him to show me. He placed his hand near the curtains and took deep breaths. I focused, and I thought I saw the curtains move. It was hard to believe, but with Elvis, anything seemed possible. Later, as we were talking, I felt a bit queasy. Elvis noticed and asked me to lie down. He placed his hand on my abdomen and told me to focus on the color green. After a few minutes, he lifted his hand, and I felt better. I was starting to believe in this kind of healing. Elvis also gave me advice about my posture and drinking water to prevent dark circles under my eyes. I took his advice, and it made me feel good to learn from him. Elvis's leg continued to bother him, and during his December 7th show, he talked about his pinched nerve and apologized to the audience. He also sang some spiritual songs, making it clear that, for him, there was only one King Jesus. After the show, I called my family. My mother told me that my grandfather, Alonzo, was ill in a nursing home. I was worried and felt torn. I didn't want to leave Elvis, but what if something happened to Alonzo? I told Elvis about the call, and he reassured me that my grandfather would be okay. He even offered to see a top doctor for my grandfather and fly my family to Las Vegas to meet him. I was stunned by his kindness. Elvis called the nursing home and spoke to the administrator. He told me my grandfather was being well cared for. Then he called my mother and said he wanted to marry me. I was shocked. I had no idea what to think. Everything was happening so fast, but I was grateful for his kindness to my family. When I called home again, my mother said it was okay for them to come to Las Vegas. Elvis was thrilled and started making arrangements. The next day, December 8th, was a nightmare. After Elvis's show, his father, Vernon, collapsed backstage. We rushed him to the hospital. Elvis sat in a wheelchair, and I put my arm around him. I could see the worry in his eyes. We said prayers as we waited. Sandy and Dr. Gainham came out and said Vernon had fluid in his lungs, but was doing okay. Elvis went in to see his father, and the doctors asked Vernon to stay overnight. I saw how much Elvis cared about his family, just as he cared about mine. It made me realize how much he meant to me. Despite the chaos, I felt a deep connection to him, and I knew I wanted to be there for him, just as he had been there for me. Elvis was different after the show. He was usually full of energy, but this time he was quiet. I could tell something was on his mind, so I decided to be there for him. If he wanted to talk, I was ready to listen. If he needed silence, I would sit with him. When we got back to the suite, Ricky Stanley was there. He hugged Elvis tightly and then surprised me with a hug too. "Thank you for being here, Ginger," he said. It felt good to know I was helping Elvis, even in a small way. Later, Elvis wanted to meditate. He asked Larry and Charlie to join us in the room. We sat on the bed, held hands, and visualized colors, focusing on healing Vernon. I tried to stay calm and positive, hoping it would help. The next night, my stomach felt weird. I didn't want to worry Elvis, so I went to the bathroom and tried a self-healing technique. I lay on the floor, took deep breaths, and focused on feeling better. When I felt a bit better, I went back to the bedroom. Elvis was reading, and when he saw me, he asked, "Why were you lying on the floor?" I was confused at first, but then Elvis winked and smiled, like he knew exactly what I was doing. It was a bit magical, and I started to believe in things I usually didn't. During his next show, Elvis seemed to forget some lyrics. I wondered if the stress or the medication was affecting him, but I knew he always gave his best. After the show, I waited in the dressing room. Elvis introduced me to Prince Adnan Khashoggi and two beautiful women. They were all talking, and Elvis seemed to be having a good time. When they left, Elvis said, "I had to use the bathroom the whole time." He rushed to the restroom and laughed. "I bet that's the first time you ever saw a prince and a king in the same room together." On Friday, December 10th, Vernon was finally out of the hospital. Elvis visited him alone, and then decided to send him back to Memphis to rest. Vernon argued, but Elvis agreed to let him stay through the last show. Elvis also arranged for me to go shopping with Joe's girlfriend, Shirley. She was chatty, and I didn't want to share much about Elvis, so I kept the conversation light. We went to a fancy store called Susie Cream Cheese, and I picked out some new clothes. Shirley paid for everything, and we went back to the Hilton. Elvis sent his jet to Memphis to bring my family to Las Vegas. I was excited to see them. After his show, I went to their suite. I called to tell them I'd see them soon. When I went to the showroom, I almost missed my family. I walked right past them without recognizing them. It was strange to realize how much my life had changed in such a short time. I joined them and we watched Elvis perform. He seemed to put extra effort into the show, and it was amazing. Someone in the audience shouted, "Elvis, I love you," and he replied, "Ginger, is that you?" My family was thrilled to hear my name. After the show, my family was taken to the penthouse, and I stayed with Elvis in the dressing room. He changed into a blue silk shirt and black pants and boots. He was nervous about meeting my family, which I found sweet. We went to the suite, and a bodyguard's wife who had had too much to drink fell off her stool. Elvis was a bit embarrassed, but went to meet my family. I introduced everyone, and Elvis remembered my dad from when he joined the army. He was surprised and said it was neat that we had met before. The next night, we went to see the Lido de Paris show, and then my family came back to watch Elvis's second show. This time, Elvis asked me to sit with the Beaulieu's, which made me feel a bit awkward. After the show, we went back to the suite. Elvis invited my family to see the suite, and I waited in the living room. When they returned, Elvis told me to put on my white gown and all my jewelry. I went to the bathroom and put on the gown, feeling like a princess. I came out and Elvis beamed at me. "There," he said to my family, "I want you to see your daughter in her true attire. It's little Ginger's time to shine." They were amazed and said I looked beautiful. Elvis gave my dad a framed painting of himself and talked about karate. He even did some moves for us, and it was fun to watch. The evening went on, and Elvis told a story about Barbara Streisand and asking him to do a movie. He said he didn't want to do it because he didn't understand the story, and the producer yawned during their meeting. I just couldn't see him directing it, Elvis said. On Sunday, December 12th, Elvis performed his last show in Las Vegas. Wayne Newton, Lola Falana, and other stars were in the audience. It was a special night, especially for my brother, who was celebrating his birthday. Elvis gave his best performance, and the night was perfect. The day I flew back to Memphis with Elvis on the Lisa Marie, I felt a mix of emotions. On one hand, it was nice to be home, but on the other, I felt a bit out of place after spending almost 3 weeks in Elvis's world. David Stanley, one of Elvis's stepbrothers, picked us up at the airport. He was a big, burly guy with long, dark hair, and Elvis joked that he was called Magilla Gorilla. As we drove toward Graceland, I saw the familiar nativity scene in the front yard. It brought back memories of my childhood, when my family and I would drive around the neighborhood during Christmas, admiring the holiday lights. Seeing it with Elvis made it even more special. Inside Graceland, A Christmas tree stood in the dining room, and Aunt Delta, Vernon's sister, welcomed us. She had been living at Graceland since the 1960s and had a cute Pomeranian in her arms. Elvis introduced us, and she made me feel at home. Upstairs, Elvis disappeared into his bathroom, and I waited, unsure what to do. I felt like a visitor, but for Elvis, my presence seemed normal. He came out in his pajamas, sat on his bed, and asked me to join him. He picked up a book and started reading, and I sat beside him, feeling tired but content. Elvis was curious about my grandfather, who was a minister, and wanted to talk to my mom about the Bible. I called home, and he had a deep conversation with her about God and history. It was interesting to hear his thoughts on spirituality, something we hadn't discussed much before. After the call, Elvis seemed to have something on his mind. "I want your parents to have a new car, a bigger one," he said. I was speechless. He then asked if I minded giving them the Continental, and said he had another car for me. I was amazed and a bit overwhelmed. The Continental was delivered to Graceland, and Elvis insisted on sending an aide to drive me home. I had never driven the car before, and it was a big white land yacht. It was a bit scary, but I managed to get home without any accidents. My sisters were there, and they were shocked when I told them about the car and what Elvis had said. I was exhausted and told them I'd share more later. When my parents got home, I took them outside and said, "It's yours." They were speechless. I told them about my time with Elvis in Las Vegas, but I couldn't share everything, like the moments when he tried to move objects with his mind. My mom and dad told me about their own experiences, including a scary encounter with a reporter who tried to get information about me and Elvis. Elvis called later that night, and my dad spoke with him about the car. Elvis made sure they felt okay about accepting it. When I got back on the phone, Elvis invited me to Graceland. He sent someone to pick me up, and when I arrived, he surprised me with a beautiful silver and maroon Cadillac Seville. He said he had bought it for his dad, but his dad didn't want it. I was touched and felt a deeper connection to Elvis. The next morning, I drove my new car home and slept for a while. My life was changing, and I was ready to see where things would go with Elvis. I called Larry and told him we couldn't see each other anymore, which was hard but necessary. That night, Elvis invited me back to Graceland. He told me that Linda Thompson had called and asked if he was going to spend Christmas with her. He then asked if I wanted to spend Christmas with him. I said yes without hesitation. He smiled, but I felt a bit uncertain. Why was Linda still calling him? I took down the pictures of her and put them in his office bathroom, which I had never seen before. It was a strange and unsettling place, and I felt a mix of emotions. Back in the bedroom, I sat beside Elvis, feeling a bit disoriented. He seemed to understand my thoughts and emotions, and I knew that our journey was just beginning. Despite the questions and uncertainties, I was willing to take a chance on this new path with Elvis.